everyone, to this week's Cat's Eye on the Future. First, I want to apologize to all my regular listeners that due to a health crisis in my extended family, I have been unable to really work for the last few weeks. I haven't done any recordings or blog updates or the radio show, but things seem to be settling down a bit. The person in question is stabilizing, and that means I can kind of get back to work. So there may be some future interruptions, but for now, I think we can go on with the show. Now, this show was originally intended to air the week of January 13th, and because it's mostly one of my new topical shows, I thought that I could go ahead and just record the show with a few modifications to update for the passing of time. Now, my goal with this week's show is, again, to begin to do occasional shows about various topics I think my listeners will enjoy. Things like the processes of card readings, maybe things about psychic readings in general, maybe even topics like ghosts or other things. But this week is pretty much a basic show on how using cards to foretell current events actually works. Things that work well and things that don't work so well unless the reader gets another source of input, such as an intuitive flash, has a dream, or other insights and specifics of what may be coming. In this card reading, future events on its own is a bit like astrology. You can get a handle on the types of things that are likely to happen and get a future roadmap put together, but you're just not going to know what sort of food the local truck stop is serving until you get there and look at the menu. Unless you're able to obtain that information by some other means. It's sort of a psychic telephone call or web page that your subconscious or your psychic senses look up. Personally, I get a lot of hunches, but I only really occasionally get full-scale future visions of actually what might happen or dreams. Some psychics get these much more often, but that's a very specialized talent. And as any kind of talent or gift, some people are better at it than others. So I'm going to start by talking a little about these sort of energy divination readings, the basic sort, how they work, and what they do really well and what they're not so precise at. Something occurred over the last few weeks in my blog. Now, this is a couple of weeks before the blog was originally meant in early January. They just seem to be a perfect example of highlight this, though, so I'm going to go ahead and use them. And don't worry, the reading shows won't go away. I will continue to do future predictions, but I thought it would be fun to mix them in with some interview shows and topics like this one. Anyway, I look forward to my listeners giving feedback on some of these changes, and particularly this show, and I really hope you do enjoy it. Do get back to me on what you think. Now, back to the topic at hand. This is a general overview of using cards and runes to read about macro current events. Some of the same information will also apply to personal readings, and I'll point this out as we go along, and I'll do another show basically on personal readings and how they work, because it's similar, but it's not quite the same, because there's some things that make current events more challenging and often less accurate than personal readings, which is no reason not to try them, because they do provide some very useful information. But it's always something to keep in mind when using cards or similar types of divination if you're trying to do basically political or current event forecasts, because you want to foretell the trends in current events on a very large topic. In the case of my blog, the shows, the weekly, monthly, or year current events for the entire world, it actually gets easier if you take smaller chunks when you bite those off to chew, because you can look at them more precisely. But first, let's see how the average reading of this type comes about. First, probably the most important topic in a current events reading, or really any reading, and this is true of personal readings too, is how you word the question. What is it that you want to know? How specific is your topic? And how do you expect to get an answer? I ran into this issue with personal readings all the time. When clients they'll ask about, say, their chances of employment in the next 6 months. But what they really want to know is which of the 3 job offers they have should they take. Sometimes they just expect you to kind of know this, and sometimes it becomes pretty obvious. And again, really intuitive readers that are not using, say, cards or a focus, they may just get this right off. With me, it usually becomes more apparent because the cards will become very mixed up. And I'll say to the person, are we really asking about work in general? Are we asking about a particular job? And then they usually tell me that it's not just one, but maybe two or three. And then we can break it down and look at each one individually. And the answers tend to be much more accurate. Or they'll ask about the general love life. This one happens to me all the time. But what they really have, particularly younger women, and it's mostly women, but sometimes men as well, they have at least two candidates for sweethearts in their head that they want to look at. But they don't tell me that. So the cards come out very confused until I again will ask, is there someone specific we're actually trying to read about? At which point I'll often hear, well, there really are these two guys or these two gals, and ... take it from there. So again, we break it down, we look at each potential person individually, and then we can even go back and look at love life in general, because they're three really kind of different topics. They're all intertwined, but it may be that neither of those two people are the right one, but the person still may be about to have a great love affair, or maybe there's really nothing for the next 6 months. We don't know that until we break it down. So when we read for the young suitor or job situation, we tend to get much clearer and more pointed answers. The same exact thing is true when reading for current events. So if that is the case, why bother to do these macro current events readings at all? Well, the reason I started doing them was I noticed when doing an old radio show years ago at the Planet Star Psychic Network, which is still around and I highly recommend them, that even though I was reading for individual people, nearly every week there was at least one card for nearly everyone. I started calling this, almost as a joke at first, the card of the week. This was a card, or rather I sensed an energy the card represented, that seemed to be affecting nearly everyone. Everywhere, or at least all of my listeners, or most of them, at the same time. So, in other words, I would everybody would get the sun card. They would have different readings and be asking about totally different topics, but the sun would show up every time, indicating to me that there was something solar or something at a sun aspect that just seemed to be playing on a lot of people all at once. When I started a web blog a few years later, I wanted to see if this might hold true for a larger group of people than just a small radio show. And I wanted to experiment doing something a little bit different with the blog. Now, there are many really good sites that people can click on for tarot readings of the day, or runes of the day, different types of things for the day. And there's even a pretty good one for the Psycard deck that I specialize in using. It's made by the Psycard company, and it's very good. But most of these sorts of sites are either canned readings based on the card descriptions from the booklet that will usually come with your deck, or they're even, if they are personally written, again, they're focused on more of sort of a general audience type of thing. But usually they're already canned responses. These are very useful in their own way. But it's always going to be the same any day that particular card gets drawn, especially if the person has gone ahead and just is either using the book or has written down specific things that they will have interpreted for a specific card. There are also a few sites where really dedicated readers actually lay out the daily reading, as I mentioned. Go through it and give it a specific interpretation. I really like those sites, and I wanted to try something similar, but I didn't want to copy them exactly. It was then I realized that I knew a few people doing astrology blogs that tried to follow and predict what was likely to happen for current events, as well as individuals, doing sort of an astrology of the day or an astrology of the week. I wondered, would cards and runes be able to do the same sort of thing? Honestly, I wasn't sure. Astrologers have been using various forms of astrology to make generalized future forecasts for thousands of years. But I thought it was worth trying to expand the card of the week to card of the day and just see what happens. So the card of the day blog was born. Just a WordPress blog that picks a card most weekdays, and later on a rune and a second card. And usually it's no longer than a 3-day reading for weekends. And these readings show the most likely energies that are going to affect events, according to the cards and runes, for the next 24 to 48 hours. Sometimes it's a bit longer, and again, I'll get hunches that may tell me that, but I always state that in the blog. In addition to the current events energies, I also try to look at how these energies would be affecting individuals as well. using pretty much the same techniques I do when reading for clients. In many ways, reading for clients is often easier because, as I said before, you've narrowed your field of influence to one or perhaps just a few people that the client is talking about. So again, the energies can narrow in on how they're affecting that person or those people. When reading current events, you are actually looking at how this energy may play with thousands or even millions of people. So there do seem to be some real patterns in how things are happening and what is affecting people at any given time period. I've gotten a lot of emails from astrologers telling me that my reading on a certain day might match their astrological information almost perfectly. This doesn't happen all the time, but it's happened often enough that it's made me really wonder. Since my personal study of astrology barely goes beyond what you see in the weekly newspaper, there's simply no way I could have been doing this either intentionally or even subconsciously. My readings were independent, using cards and rune staves and hunches, but obviously we were all tapping into a sort of universal energy bank for that particular time period. Now, I know some psychics, especially ones who are gifted with the ability to do lots of specific predictions about definitive events, don't like to read the news or consult anything beyond their gift because they don't want to be contaminated by outside information in some way. This works very well for them, and I'm in no way suggesting they should do it any other way. But I'm doing something a bit different with my blog and current events readings. While I do sometimes get dreams, visions, or premonitions of very specific events, that part of my gift is erratic. It tends to manifest when it wants to, and it isn't easily relied upon. Great when it shows up, but not my strongest feature. I would not try to do a regular blog on the topic. I do mention them when they occur and will continue to do so, but it's not my major focus. Instead, I've always had a gift both in the psychic realm and in general observation of being really good at grasping big pictures. To understand big pictures, you have to be able to look at information from lots and lots and lots of little pieces from all sorts of places, put them together, and then they make a whole pattern. For this reason, I've decided to go for what I think of as the Merlin option, which I may do a whole show on later. But the Merlin option, when it comes to doing readings, especially reading current events or other non-personal issues, in other words, what you do in reading for a particular client, is something you see all over the world and in almost every society, wherever you have leaders. Because wherever you have leaders, they want advice, so you have advisors. Traditionally, at least one or more of these advisors has been some sort of magical worker, religious leader, or diviner, someone who does divination. Many ancient leaders could have dozens of these people, but often one or two were really relied upon. Merlin is probably the best known in the English-speaking world for this archetype, which is why I chose his name to put on this idea. But you could easily look at, say, Queen Elizabeth I's advisor, John Dee. Catherine de' Medici had actually used Nostradamus. He actually drew up individual horoscopes for royal family members and the children. And in the Bible, you have Nebuchadnezzar using Daniel as an example. We even have kind of anti-diviners, if you like, people who serve the same role but aren't necessarily good people. But Rasputin, for example, would be such an advisor, who may have had a very negative influence over those he advised, but he still fills this Merlin role, which has probably been used by both good or bad people since the beginnings of human history. The thing about the Merlin role is that it can be played in many different ways, but when it came down to the traditional times, Merlin's main job was to advise the king or the queen and get it right. In general, I don't think most of these rulers really cared, for example, if the information their pet Merlin got them enabled them to win an upcoming battle because he got it from looking at a crystal ball, or he ran a really good spy network. Some of the best examples of Merlin figures, both in history and fiction, show them doing a bit of both, combining the supernatural with the seemingly mundane or very clever to advance the cause or situation of the person that they are serving. I came to the conclusion early on that while I in no way consider myself to be on a level of, say, Merlin or even Gandalf, I would attempt to do current events readings in a similar fashion. I would use the cards and runes as a jumping off point. I would rely on basic inner hunches, or even the occasional vivid dream, vision, or psychic flash for special insight. But I would also delve deeper into my love of news watching, trend following, historical cycle making, and all the things that I've had since I was old enough to reach up and been interested in, since I could look at the table and figure out a headline, which was probably about age 8 or 9. I've also made a point of looking at some things that show up with all of my training that in anthropology and history from university to the spiritually work that I did for 5 years when studying at the Fellowship of the Spiral Path it's a pagan seminary in California. I noticed that this does not seem to make my work like psychic, any of this. If anything, my following all of these things and using this information tends to give my hunches a place to head for. And often I understand the information I'm getting from the cards and runes better. A lot of my various predictions of the blog are usually along the lines of, and it is very likely you will see blank in the news this week, or hot topics are probably going to be blank. And they're based on a combination of the basic cards, say the moon, but also knowing it's a full moon or a dark moon. Feeling an inner hunch that an earthquake might be likely, and then remembering and putting together with my conscious mind that earthquakes are much more likely at those 2 points in the lunar cycle. But the same card might also have me suggesting that people should watch out for mass hysteria on a particular topic, or perhaps a new dream technology is coming about based on my card, plus inner knowing. Any of those things could be likely, and it takes a use of both the inner information and the outer information to help make a good speculation. I also always try to be honest. Sometimes I realize something in a daily reading that seems to be an obvious energy reflected in something I've already read about this morning. When that happens, I try to mention it because I try to help readers with a roadmap for the day, week, or month is likely to happen next. I'm not trying to win a guessing game of spot on or exact predictions every morning. So if it's already occurred, but the energy is there, I will mention, as happened this morning, the shows that the solar card is there, and we had this great story on solar power energy. It fulfills the energy. I can't claim it as like a hit of any kind because it happened before I did the reading, but it does show that is really the energy of that particular day. Okay, so if they don't read exact and specific events unless you ask them directly, what do the more open energy card readings and other types of tools to this kind of reading actually do? Well, for the most part, they point out the most likely type of events or situations that are going to happen in the time period read for. It doesn't mean a great event based on the energy will happen, but it does make it so we're likely that it will. And if you keep your eyes open, you're likely to see that energy influences all sorts of people, situations, nations in a similar fashion. It'll all come out kind of uniquely. It won't be the same everywhere, but you'll see the same sorts of things operating. And this is often true right down to your individual family members, co-workers, friends, and even yourself. Another thing these readings can do is sometimes point out something that might not be obvious at the time, but in retrospect turns out to be the case. Either because the information was simply not made public, or because it would simply be impossible without a specific dream, vision, or direct psychic flash to put the pieces together as they actually are going to turn out. A great example of the first type of hidden reading concerned a secret Russian submarine disaster that took place several years ago. This is not the big one the world remembers where the guys were writing notes and things. This was a smaller one that happened about a few months after. Just for fun, I went back and looked at my blog on the date when it was finally announced. It wasn't announced for until 6 months after the actual incident had occurred. The ship had gone down. So again, just for fun, I went back and looked at my blog, provided a public, because it provides kind of a public record of readings, and found that on the day the Russian accident occurred, I didn't have anything interesting that seemed to connect. The next day was all about something under the sea. For some reasons, I feel drawn beneath the waters, that sort of thing. I don't recall the exact wording, but I remember just sitting there quietly stunned. At the time, it seemed like a complete miss, a prediction that needed its own buzzer for Not. But in reality, I obviously was picking up on something. That hunch was correct, but without the blog, I could never have gone back and looked it up. Which is why I encourage people, if you're getting into this at all, either for personal reasons, your own personal readings, or reading for other people, with their permission, you might want to keep kind of even just your own private log or a diary of what's going on. Obviously, if you're reading for others, you want to like take out their names and any information, but you may just want to kind of keep track. If you're reading for yourself, of course, it's completely legitimate to do this. Go back every so often and look to see how things fit together. I'm not sure exactly how much good this sort of hidden in plain sight sort of reading does, especially for current events, though it can be very useful again when reading for individuals. Many times I've had these same sorts of hunches. I've been able to zoom in exactly on what a client's underlying problem or question really was. This happens frequently when a client keeps asking one set of questions, but the answers turn out to be repeating cards that don't seem to be related to what's being asked for at all. But after the third or fourth time, they all seem to relate to each other. So again, you can sit there and you can go, the person's asking about love life, but money keeps coming up over and over, and you can finally say very gently, "Are you been concerned about finances lately?" or something like that, because really the cards are pointing out that the most important thing for the person right then really isn't their love life, it's their economic situation. These types of readings turn up a lot when someone is consulting also on romantic issues, or a partner with a problem. And the cards and runes keep flagging something like anger, jealousy, self-esteem over and over, until it becomes obvious that again, the romance really isn't the issue. It's something else in the client's life that needs to be dealt with that just happens to affect their marriage. The exact same thing can happen in current events, though more often in topical readings rather than in the more general ones I do on the daily blog site. So for example, if a client asks me a particular question about current events, if I'm reading that specific thing, I'm much more likely to have this sort of issue come up.
All the music used on the show today is from musicalley.com, your source for free-to-air music for podcasts. The artists place their music up for free to air in hopes that you, the listener, will visit their site and purchase some of their outstanding musical offerings. So after the show, why not visit musicalley.com and explore their extensive playlist?
And she sings, she goes home in the evening with the dew all on her wings.
Do you have questions? The cards have answers. If you would like a personal reading with Melody, just go to my website, melodipsychicreadings.com. That's Melody with an I, psychicreadings.com, for information, or email me at melodyreader@gmail.com. Readings are available using Skype, phone, email, or even in person if you are lucky to live in Ireland. Why not find out what special messages the cards have just for you and book a private reading today?
And see me from beneath the sea, the best in all of Ireland. See me from beneath the sea, the best in all of Ireland.
Now, the second type of big puzzle reading is the type that occurred over the past weeks when I originally wrote this script in early January, and so I wanted to have a go at it here on the air. Anyone interested can go back and look at the readings from my website and see the exact cards and runes for each day. I actually didn't read every day during the holiday period, but there's kind of enough there we could go back and see the pattern. The most startling pattern concerned the reading for Wednesday, January 8th, 2014, when I had the card for Death in the side card deck, the card for Death in the Cat's Eye Tarot rune, and the rune Tiwaj, or Justice, for the rune. I also had the rune Tiwaj in the reading the day before, along with the tree and the Ace of Swords. Now, the tree is often the world, but it can also be the foundation of a problem, like the roots of the tree, or combine things that are connected together, like a family tree. The Ace of Kitty Swords is a creative or clever individual that is practical, but they like to play around. They seem to know just exactly how much they can get away with. There's a Siamese cat playing with a feather, but ignoring the pet bird the feather came from. However, the bird looks nervous the cat knows it can't get that far, but he's still playing with the feather and letting the bird watch. Like, I know I'm really not going to do this, but the bird doesn't know this. Again, with the rune for justice, which can also involve law, lawyers, police, military, etc. there in the background. So you have this law thing going. On Monday, the day before, we had the card Yes, which usually means yes something, with the Knight of Kitty Wands. A rather self-reliant and self-centered young tomcat sits on a tree branch. He feels like he can do everything his own way without any help. And the Urus are ancient cattle rune. The ancient cattle rune can refer to something that's strong, but it can also refer to a stampede of events, things that just don't stop, until it either goes off a cliff or it chooses to stop on its own. Finally, if we then go back to the previous weekend, we have another double reading and the last reading of the week before. 2 sun images, both the rune Sowilo and the sun card. So we have sun close together, 6 of cups, innocent kittens playing together, and yes, Urus again, so effectively that we have Urus run for strength or stampeding 2 days in a row. So we have double sun and stampeding. Now it was pretty obvious to me that the sun strength combination probably indicated the sun was about to heat up for an unexpected round of activity. Or perhaps there would be more nuclear news, because the sun also involves things like lightning, power generation, and all things nuclear. In fact, all of these things manifested shortly after the readings, with the sun in itself shooting off solar flares large enough to create auroras here in Ireland, power cuts due to massive storms in North America, and parts of the UK, Ireland, and Northern Europe. And radiation in Fukushima were back strongly in the news, with radiation reported on western beaches, and seemed to be coming from, and steam was even seen coming from reactor 4, which was a big story at the time. Always remember something very important about this sort of energy reading. In the absence of a powerful hunch, vision, dream, etc., one way or another, a story doesn't have to be, quote, true, unquote, to get a flag. It just has to be a popular news item and get talked about. Hence, steam coming from the reactor, or even the California radiation stories, don't have to pan out to be accurate, and quite frankly, those are both still up in the air at this point several weeks later, but they may come out to be correct. But all they have to do is exist as a major news theme to count in these sort of broad current event speculative readings. However, will the sun Urus combination seem really straightforward, stampeding sun? I was really puzzled the next following week by some other readings. This culminated in my being completely baffled by the death, justice pattern started on Tuesday, but went into full string of weirdness on Wednesday with the double death cards. Now, just to remind my listeners, neither death card in either deck means that someone is going to die. It can mean that in rare cases, and in current events readings, this is always not a big surprise. Obviously, people die all the time, but an important or famous person can die any day of the week. But this double combination seemed to be very powerful and not a little bit creepy. Death cards can also mean massive transformation and change, either of one thing in particular, or just a lot of things in a short time. Death cards can also mean the final ending of a situation, idea, job, etc. There are a lot of ways to die that are symbolic. I read this as probably being about the sudden change or transformation of something, probably legal or military. That's how I read it at the time. One reader suggested even looking at the laws around marijuana in the U.S., and that I might do another reading another time, because yes, there had been a lot of change and transformation going on around that time, and there were announcements of other states and areas of the U.S. that might be headed towards legalization, hence a major transformation or change, the death of an old system, the beginning of the new. So yes, I do think the energy was acting on this issue. Usually it does act in more than one place. I also got some feedback from people having personal changes in their own lives. Again, you'd expect that with the energy. But the really weird thing to me was, even with the double death energy, which made me think of the double D-Day in that great movie with Robin Williams, What Dreams May Come, this seemed to be powerful and important in some way, especially with that justice rune. Now, I didn't have any real sense of dread like I had experienced right before the Oklahoma City bombing, the Challenger accident, or even when the cards pretty much predicted Hurricane Sandy and that it would be a monstrous, quote, beast, unquote, of a storm. No, this felt important in some way, but not anything really dreadful, at least not to me, or things I really cared about. I just pointed out twice, as a matter of fact, that on the T-Wash day, people should avoid breaking traffic laws, and felt a weird hunch connection to the idea of traffic laws, police, etc. This fit with T-Wash, but it was unusual for me to mention it twice in the same reading. Usually I will just say something like that once. But mostly, I just sort of went away puzzled, and admitted on the blog that I had absolutely no clue what the specifics of this were about. Only pay attention, because with the double cards and double runes, it was probably something really big. Then Thursday, a major story started breaking in the US. At first, I really wasn't paying much attention. I live in Ireland. I may be a US citizen, but frankly, politics in New Jersey has never really been a strong interest of mine. But within hours, there were headlines that the governor of the state, a man who in fact had been governor during the above-mentioned beast of Hurricane Sandy, was being accused, or his staff were being accused, the stories were unclear on that point, of having a tantrum over a fellow politician refusing to agree to something, and decided to cause, wait for it, a traffic jam on a major bridge. It was also alleged that at least one person had died because they were delayed from getting to the hospital by the traffic jam. So we have death one right there, if that is the case. But in any case, like I said, it doesn't have to actually have occurred for that reason, but it's flagged as part of the story. We have the first death. The traffic or bridge scandal just kept getting larger and larger until by the last night and that morning, there were headlines all over the place with saying things like, the death of the governor's presidential hopes, campaign or future career in politics, depending on how the headline was worded. But it was the death of the governor's, whatever, over and over again. Followed by a hunch a few years later on Friday with headlines about lawsuits against governor filled over traffic jam, which was again a perfect example of the T-Wash rune. Beloved of lawyers since the Viking Age, if I ever heard one. I mean, the Vikings, particularly those in Iceland, they gave modern Hollywood divorce lawyers a run for their money when it came to lawsuits, and the T-Wash rune would have been that rune that would have been invoked. It would have been the Justice rune. So we now have two deaths, one real or actual, if a relatively unknown person, and the other the career or potential career followed by litigation of someone very well known. We also have a man, a politician, who may himself be innocent in the kittens, although since I wrote the scripts I've also found that there were connections to small children. Apparently there was a small child lost, and it was believed in the papers, anyway, reported that there was difficulty in finding the child, who thankfully was eventually found safely, but the search was interrupted by this bridge closure, so that may actually be the kitten, I think. That didn't make sense even when I wrote this script. But we don't know yet. No one has been charged with anything at the time even of this writing or this reporting. But this is also someone who probably seemed very clever and believed they knew just how far they could go playing the game, but may have been just a little too independent-minded. Remember that young tomcat? At this point, it is impossible to know either if it was really a traffic jam that got him in trouble, or perhaps his independent and somewhat hubristic streak caused by an old enemy or two to decide they wanted to fling some mud in his general direction. As I said, I wasn't really following the man very much, just knew him as a rather large-sized politician who had a name for himself during the hurricane, and had been bandied about as a serious contender for the Republican presidential nomination when the next U.S. election cycle comes in. So he's a public figure, and presumably he's going to start being a target. For now, at least, whatever the truth of the matter, his election hopes are effectively dead. One aspect of T-Wash is, in addition to laws, justice, and lawsuits, it has aspects of battles about it, especially legal battles, though sometimes actually personal battles involving individuals or even feuding clans. Something about this smells to me of clan war in a modern form, with various factions of politicians and their followers making a sort of war on each other. In any case, I brought this up here to show as a stunning example of the cards and runes being spot on, but in a way which would have been nearly impossible to sort out again in the absence of those dreams, visions, or even a waking hunch. This might have come out, I might have been able to interpret it better if I'd lived in New Jersey and been closer to the topic. Though even that would have been difficult to foresee anything short of a complete psychic flash or dream. Here the Merlin option only works if you know about the traffic jam, the local politics, and perhaps have spies in either camp so you can make an educated conclusion, possibly ahead of everybody else. In this case, I was not gifted with even a strong hunch as to what all this meant, other than that it was very important in some way, but not nearly as dire probably as the death-justice combination suggested, at least not for me, which fits right in with the actual outcome. It is potentially very important. I've never been certain if we really have more than one timeline in our future, but I've always thought it's likely that alternative or not, we probably have just avoided a future where there was a U.S. President Christie. For good or ill, we simply don't know, because right now that looks very unlikely to happen. The traffic going in that direction was halted by an international traffic jam created for political reasons and whose email somehow made it to the national press. Even if the governor himself is as innocent as those playing kittens, his public and rather imposing image are unlikely to get him out of this one in time for the presidential run. And if he goes ahead and tries it anyway, the road is likely to be set by the scandal and is going to be paved with potholes and broken concrete. For the rest of us, the news in this blog reading suddenly shifted energy on Friday once the story about Traffic-gate was well and truly out. The weekend reading I did for January 11th then shifted right back to the tree, but this time modified by the Cat's Eye Five of Pentacles and the Fehu rune. The tree in this case, probably the roots of another problem, or perhaps a situation infecting the world. The Five of Kitty Pentacles shows a young, probably mother cat with her kitten. She's bedraggled and leaky-eyed, trying to open a trash bag in a back alley to get food. If that wasn't the perfect image of the eyes of the public returning back to issues of want, poverty, hunger, and welfare, I don't know what is. On the card, there is an empty food dish showing that someone does care and does put out some food for the feral cats in the alley, but this mama cat has missed the filled dish. Hopefully when she returns, someone will at least have given her and her baby a bit to help, but we won't know that yet. The Fehu rune is also about wealth. In fact, the rune means cattle, but that's wealth to an ancient Germanic tribesman, all the cows you can eat, and herd. This rune is also associated with actual gold, as well as modern money, and has some connections to the goddess Freya and fertility as well. In this case, I think when combined with the kitten on the other card, it reflects on the effects on fertility and children of the ongoing economic crisis. I think it shows the dramatic energy shift from the previous time period, with the focus on politics towards one headed towards focus on economic problems and issues of personal sustainability that are going to be very high on the public's list of important things to pay attention to. Indeed, when I wrote this 2 weeks ago, this had yet to happen, but these past 2 weeks have seen a serious shift in public focus on the problems of the economy, making ends meet, high costs of living in North America and Europe, culminating in most news networks reporting yesterday. I finally got a television hooked up for the first time in about 4 years, and all the news stations were on the World Economic Forum in Davos again. This is, just a fulfillment of these predictions in the sense that it's really, really in the news. And finally, as of yesterday, Friday, January 24th, we had concern for a falling stock market that at least economists were thinking could be potentially rather serious. We don't know yet, but it's a topic of conversation. So the governor's car wreck will likely be remembered as a several-day wonder in terms of distraction. But this and other stories are unlikely to have any long-term ability to take people's minds off some very serious economic issues that is pounding them in their public and private lives. Interestingly enough, astrologer Carl Brodo's monthly astrology forecast for the coming month of February also goes back and reviews the astrology around the events of Governor Christie and comes to a very similar conclusion. I highly encourage my listeners to go take a look at Carl's free recent forecasts that are on YouTube. And I'll put up a link to his web pages because he's really, really good at explaining things. And I just about jumped out of my seat when he did the Sedgway into Christie because it was so similar, but coming from a totally different style of divination. I've had other astrologer friends who have repeatedly noticed a similarity between my style of using cards to read energies around a topic or possible future, and the use of astrology to come up with the same conclusions. Since I am untrained in astrology at this time, I have to rely on others for that sort of input. But my hunch is that both card readings and a certain type of astrology can be used to see what sort of events are likely to occur and predict the most likely outcome when they actually do. So while this general reading doesn't go into specifics, I'm not sure exactly what this current time period will involve over the next few weeks. But issues with money and preoccupation with both macro and personal economics are pretty certain. In fact, I said in the original draft of this report on January 11th, quote, I'm sure that the subjects of things like unemployment, currency, banking, personal, as well as public economics are going to be very high on the public's mind as they see December's bills in their mailboxes and retailers get really bad sales figures. There may even be a major corporate layoffs or businesses that fail during this weekend or this time period. Again, not a promise, but the energy is certainly there for it. And indeed, that has been one of the major, if not the major focuses of the past 2 weeks, at least in North America and Europe. We've had reports of companies like Sears Roebuck having possibly going bankrupt and Walmart even cutting back. We've had reports of really bad sales figures in Britain. And again, the issues of keeping up and being able to afford electricity and food and things have been very, very strong, at least in our papers and from what I've seen of the North American papers as well. So personal and macroeconomics have been this last 2 weeks time period. And actually, even though I have not done another reading, my psychic hunch is this is going to continue for at least another week. But I'll be looking at that more in my blog this coming week, so you can go there on Monday and Tuesday for more information. Topics like war, the weather, or radiation, of course, have not totally gone away during the past 2 weeks, but the economics, job, cost of living has been very prominent. Governor Christie has kind of fallen off the radar for the most part for now. The image of young mother cats, or human beings, running through garbage to feed their kittens is a very powerful archetype and not one easily ignored when it shows up like this. I mean, this kind of haunted me for several days. On a personal level, this entire time period may be a very good time to keep a tight rein on your personal spending, which you probably already are, but also don't be afraid to accept help. Be willing to eat from that food bowl if somebody fills it, if you really need it. Because this is a time when there are a lot of people, a lot of mother cats reading through garbage, and it's up to other people who have maybe a little extra food bowl to be kind. I hope you enjoyed this first week's topical show. In some ways, I think the production delays made the basic review of the information even more interesting. Because again, the goal here was not to predict Chris Christie's bridge too far, but show how cards can be used to show how they can be read, what sort of energies are out there to make certain types of events likely, but how it can be nearly impossible just using cards to know an exact event, unless you're asked a specific question about that event, which no one would have asked about that event unless you lived in New Jersey and you had a suspicion. You're probably not going to ask what about the traffic jam. However, once you know the exact event, it then becomes possible to ask more specific questions about the consequences of that event and do further readings if you wish to. Taking that into account, we may later return to Governor Christie, particularly if he decides to continue on his previous public course of trying to run for the U.S. White House. My hunch is that bridge incident has derailed any such attempts for right now, but I'm not certain it's a permanent change. Politics is a funny thing, and because so much of it is about personal choices of individuals, good choices and bad choices, it can actually be a trickier topic to read than, say, longer-term trends like macroeconomics, or even to ask if, say, a volcano is likely to erupt in the next 10 years, a particular specific volcano. For now, though, I'm going to go ahead and leave Governor Christie with his bridge. And I'd like to thank all my listeners for being here this evening, everybody at Time Monk Radio Network, UK Pagan Network, Heathen Radio Network, and of course the YouTube archives. All going well. I'm looking forward to seeing you again soon. And I'll be back with Cat's Eye on the Future.
But here's a health to the company and one to my lass.
You have been listening to Cat's Eye on the Future, the show where we take a glimpse of the energies coming soon into your world and into your future. Be sure to join us again next time when we explore another chapter of Cat's Eye on the Future.
Again. But here's a health to the company and one to my last. Let's drink and be merry all out of one glass. Let's drink and be